After assessing all of the results from a political and also from a practical project leader's perspective of the sand motor after a decade, we will dive into two perspectives once more. One, in more detail, the political decision making, and two, the scientific findings and implications. And you can enter your questions in the chat as well, just like before the break. And if you mention your country, we will address you accordingly. So thank you very much for joining us again for the second half of the Sand Motor Project, 10 years. The company helping the government to actually execute this humongous project is Deltares. As the director of Deltares, she has contributed to the decision making, but mostly in her previous role as a director general of water at the Ministry of Infrastructure 10 years ago. And by now she is divided between two passions of hers. One is the public cause, pretty obvious for someone with this extensive experience in the public arena, but also opera. So we will see whether politics, in fact, is a bit of theater. More specifically, was the sand motor decision making a political drama? Let's hear from Director of Deltares, Annemieke Nijhof. And for all the presentations after a break, we invite the speakers to take the floor at the far end corner of the room. And indeed, Annemieke Nijhof, a political drama?
Um, well, I personally, I really like dramas with bad endings. So you could say not, but there are also operas with good endings, from Mozart operas, for example. So probably it could have been like Madame Butterfly, or with Harakiri, or with La Traviata by death by diseases, or other things, but or Othello,
Was there
killed by jealousy.
was
Uh,
there a point in time you considered to commit harakiri in this process?
Actually, I've come very close, but I will disclose this a bit from the inside, behind the screens of the political decision making.
How's that for a cliffhanger? Thank you very much.
Yes.
Annemieke Nijhoff.
Thank you so much for inviting me here, because this was a great opportunity to go back in time in my memories. And of course, we have seen all the interviews in the parliamentary inquiry, and then people say, I cannot remember how it really happened. And probably this is also the case with me. But I have some very vivid memories of this period. And it's also interesting to hear my successor, Jaap, talk about this, and also the great speech from Rijkswaterstaat, because when something becomes a success, everyone forgets that this is not falling from the sky, and that there has also been quite some fights and tensions about this decision making. So I will dive a bit with you into three themes. The first one is the disclosure of how do you convince policy and politicians to take a decision which is very uncertain when it comes to the outcome. The second thing is, but I can keep it short because we had this tremendous video before the break, what it actually is the outcome and the impact of this great project. And I would like to have some time to look to the future, because it looks like a closing ceremony here for a big project, but actually I hope we come to the conclusion after this day that this is just the opening scene of the future. Um, well, first, let me explain a bit about the context. I entered the role of Director General of Water Management in 2008, and we just were facing the impacts of the financial crisis. And the cabinet was forced to take tremendous budget cuts on public spending and also on water management. So I was faced to look for budget for savings for about 150 million euros per year annually from our expenditures. And then there was this project, this big project, looking for financial support from the budget we had as water managers. And I had big debates. First, of course, on all these uncertainties. Politicians don't like uncertainties. And it was about the swimmers, if they would be in dangerous situations, and if this project would lead to extra death or incidents during the summer period. And it was about the drinking water supply, and if this new sand motor would lead to more salination behind the dunes and it therefore affecting the drinking water supply. And what also disturbed the process was that were mixing up these different goal settings. And of course, this is part of the success that we did it, but we all developed our own narratives. And for the water management perspective, we were developing the narrative of climate change and um, also working ahead, being prepared, not waiting for the moment to do something when it's necessary, but work ahead and transform solidarity to future generations in real action. But for the other part of the ministry, Rijkswaterstaat, who was responsible for maintenance, and by that time, I was working together with Bert Keits. He unfortunately he is not alive anymore, but and he was responsible for the maintenance of the coast. And he said, "I do not have enough budget for my responsibility. I really look into shortage of money for coastal protection, but also for the Maaslandkering and for other things that I have to do. And you will spend money on something for which the outcome, for which I'm responsible, is uncertain. Why are you wasting money while I'm lacking money to do what's necessary and what is written in the law?" So we had big debates. Even my kids were listening. They were very small and they were sleeping. And the next morning they came and they said, "Mom, you had a little fight, didn't you?" I said, "Fight, fight, fight." "Yes, with Bert." I said, "Okay, were you listening?" "Yes, we were listening. But Mom, you didn't got much room for interference, eh? You were always talking about, yes, but Bert, yes, but Bert, yes, but Bert." And she said, "He wasn't listening to you." So this was quite a tense situation. And then you can imagine you're our deputy minister, Tineke Huizinga by the time, who really liked both of us. And she was having two primary advisors on her table. And one said, "I think you have to do it because of my line of reasoning and my narrative." And the other one who said, "Well, I don't think you should do this because it's uncertain if it will work out, and we aren't able to maintain our formal duties." And and then she went home, and you can see how small things can make a difference. Um, because her husband is an entrepreneur, and she was talking to Ruud at home, and she said, "Well, Ruud, this is the case. What do you think about it?" And then he said, "Well, companies that invest during crisis are the survivors. If you have lack of money and you're sure that you're not can do what you're supposed to do in the current way, you have to find other ways." So she came back on Monday after the weekend, and she says, "We're moving on. We have to innovate, because if we move on the same line of thinking and working, we are sure in trouble because of lack of money." And this was also for me a learning experience, that you have to look from all the different perspectives, from the entrepreneurial perspective, but also the risk perspective, the societal perspective, your own policy goals you have to achieve, but also what is relevant for the region. And I think another thing is it's about momentum. And the momentum created around the sand engine came from science, from Ronald Waterman, who was one of the first persons who came to meet me when I was appointed Director General. And I invited him for 1 hour, and he said, "I'm not coming for 1 hour. If I come for 3 hours at least, because I have some story to tell." And well, I did. I invited him, and we had a good talk about the scientific perspective of the coastal development in the Netherlands. But it was also from the dredger companies. And they were working on Maasvlakte 2, and they had all their equipment there. So I phoned them and I said, "Don't let me down. Please give me as much sand as possible for 75 million euros. Because this has to become a success. You're already there, so there is economies of scale, and there is also a window of opportunity for you to do something very special. So don't let me down. Don't screw me up from a commercial perspective, because this is something we have to do together." And I think without the everlasting energy from Leni, and I think it's great to have her here, and the brave and bold move from Tineke Huizinga, and the support from Ineke van der Hey from Rijkswaterstaat. And probably it's a coincidence that it were 4 women who were involved in the final decision making, but probably not. We uh, took this bold move. And I think if we look, and that's the second part, to the outcome, um, we really can be very proud. It's great to listen to, to, to the stories and to read about it and to see what we've gained from this fantastic project. There is sand in the dunes, and I was informed that before the sand motor, our models in how dunes developed and what we can do with these insights were based on knowledge from the Sahara. And I think the Sahara is not really comparable to our area here. So we really came to the next level of understanding how the dune development takes place. And this is of tremendous importance for the future. We have learned a lot and seen that the biodiversity in the coastal zone has been also very, very interesting in the developments. We have seen the leisure developments, and I was last week I was seeing a commercial from the city of The Hague, who starts with the iconic picture of the sand motor. So I think it's amazing, just like Room for the Rivers, that we achieved to create something from which the success is of everyone. And everyone who is talking about this project is telling that he or she contributed to it. And that is great, because this is only something that we can do together. And by this project, I'm sure that we added a very vital way of working in water management and water safety, and in the building with nature repertoire of the Dutch approach and the international approach. And it cannot be underestimated that it's not only the knowledge which ends up in reports or in models, but that we created a community, over 20 PhDs, a number of researchers who were inspired and taught and learning a joint way of looking and talking and having a vocabulary that's really making a difference. It's about impact. If you have only 1 or 2 researchers, it's much more difficult to change the world than when you have a vivid community that we have developed over here. And it's about contractors, it's about the engineering companies, it's about the applied research institutes, and it is about the universities who all teamed up. Then the future. The future started yesterday or last year or 10 years ago, and we wasted a lot of time, not in the sand engine project, or the sand motor project. I was taught teach to call it a sand engine, but never mind. The future already started, and I'm now I have to become a bit serious. I am really, really, really worried And you have seen the concept reports of the IPCC, the disclosure of this. And I think, although we are not measuring fast developments, I think we have to be prepared. It might be faster than we expect nowadays. And the second lesson is, in our country, when we have to act and when we have to do something which is bigger than small, it takes always more time than we expect. So we are squeezed. It might be that we have to act faster, and in the experience is that large projects take decades. So we have to start now. We have to work ahead. And I fully understand that if Jaap has limited budget and he is responsible for water safety, and you make calculations if you have to move on from the perspective of safety, that you can postpone a little. But this project demonstrates that if you combine goals and if you take the advantage of using the time, you can use the ingenuity of nature in the way we work. And it creates a challenging research environment, which is very important. And I think we have to step up on the engine. We do not have to close this development. It was just the first step. And we know that when we look to the south, the coastal line of South Holland, that there are very good opportunities to move on in the South Holland area. And also in the whole coastal area, I think we should use this pilot as a prototype. And a prototype means is that you produce more projects to have a bigger impact, and not only dot after a successful pilot. That's the way that the Dutch work. We do successful pilots, but we should do successful prototypes. And I think this is a perfect prototype, and we have to move on, and we have to decide that today we celebrate a success, but it doesn't fall from the sky. And it's hard work, it's cooperation, it's looking for people who really commit and connect themselves to the decision, entrepreneurship, and bold moves. So I hope that we can next year, around this time, celebrate the fact that we move on with the second sand motor in the Netherlands to make our coastline work ahead and create a new coastline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annemieke Nijhof. But Bert, that was what helped you to make this work. You engaged the decision makers, you engaged the commercial entities. You mentioned also that such projects typically stretch their time windows somewhat, right?
Yeah.
What about the money window? Is a question from Portugal coming in.
Well, I think the paradox is that by the time that we decided on this sand motor, there was shortage of money. And probably that was a
2008?
2008, 9, when we were preparing this decision.
Just recovering from the credit crunch?
From the credit crunch. So we were really lacking money and we had to have budget cuts. But this created, I think, the platform for thinking about doing something different than today. We had to innovate, because if we moved on the same road, we would never achieve our goals. So this was creating actually the budget cuts, an innovative platform. And now it looks like we have plenty of money. We have all kind of funds. We have green funds, we have resilience funds, we have recovery funds. But it looks like it's more difficult to think big. And we are facing big challenges, and they require big thinking, and they are requiring bold moves. And I think money cannot be the excuse, but we have to come up with great plans, good scientific foundations, and a genuine dedication to cooperation.
Yeah, and also from Spain, there are questions coming in about other potential projects. You already mentioned Sand Motor 2. That's stuck in our minds from now on. What do we need? What kind of decision making do we need?
Well,
You mentioned we need to innovate not just the physical execution, but also the decision making. What is it that we need first to innovate decision making?
well, first, I think the basis for this success was combining goals. So accept that you're not doing this only for the thing that you have money for, but that you create the humus for growth from several perspectives. It requires close cooperation between the different levels of government. In this case, the central government, the province, but also the municipalities were involved. So that is the second requirement. Um, I think when I said second sand motor, I think probably it's already the fifth or the sixth, because we already have, and we will hear later in this program about successful projects that came after this project already, also internationally in the UK, and but also in the Netherlands. But I think we tend to only accept thinking in big projects when we contain it as a pilot, and then don't do it ever again. And I think that's a waste of all the intelligence that we developed.
Or when there is a big crisis, the climate crisis
Yeah,
coming
but I
up,
think we
would that
are.
be a strong enough argument?
I think that's what we're hoping for a long time. I think scientists are telling us that we have to work ahead, and that we are facing big changes. But it's not felt like an acute issue like the pandemic was last year. So we were able to spend 60 billion euros in the Netherlands on the COVID crisis. But this is much more difficult, and I think there's a good way. We still have time, and we can use this time in a smart and clever way. I'm not promoting just throwing the money into the water or water sector,
Or on the
but
beach?
I think there is a cultural barrier in the Dutch culture to really think in scaling up successful examples. So why aren't we now moving on in the Southwest Coast Initiative or in other areas? Because we know it works, and it creates value from different perspectives. And we know that sea level will rise. And we do not know exactly how fast and when it will. But why are we just doing the least that's necessary and not working in this philosophy?
So
Buffering the system, create space for resilience. We are promoting this all around the world, but we have to do it in our own backyard too.
yeah. So from this piece of theater, the main slogan, the to be or not to be of the sand motor future, could be, we need bold moves.
Bold moves.
Thank you very much. Annemieke Nijhof.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then from a research perspective, many claims have been made so far about what the impact of this project on the research community can be. Let's hear from an insider who used to be an outsider to the research community. He used to be in the dredging business at Boskalis back then, but currently he is the head of the department hydraulic engineering at Technical University in Delft. He is professor of coastal engineering himself. Stefan Aarninkhof. Well, let's dredge for some scientific results.
We can do that, absolutely.
You can take your spot in the far end. And before we assess the success, you have a question about success, the concept of success, isn't it?
You mean the question, was it worth it?
Yeah, yeah. For instance, how do you determine that?
Well, that's a good question, of course. I mean, there are several ways how you can indicate that. For us as scientists, we often look at the uptake of our results, right? That is the scientific uptake, but also how our results are landing in the real world, in real world projects. But then at the end of the day, we all want to work on a better society, right? And how does society appreciate the work that we do and the findings that we come up with? Well, that's going to be a whole new challenge, and we're only at the onset
Yeah,
of
so
addressing that challenge.
that would require a definition of better in better society.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, let's find out. In the Mentimeter polls, you can find the next question for Mr. Professor Stefan Aarninkhof from
Okay,
now on, from
Stefan.
Stefan's talk. What is your criterion for success of this sand motor project? What would be, if you were the boss of it all, what would be your criterion for success? What would be something to assess results
Very nice.
against?
Yeah, very nice.
Okay, so what criteria do we see, Stefan? Was it sediment distribution, safety?
Well, I think the well, living in Holland, we cannot get across safety, of course. I mean, if we don't have a safe coastal defense system, our country will flood, and the investments in the coastal zone are simply too large to let that happen. But beyond that, I think there are tremendous opportunities to combine that prime role of safety with other functions in your coastal system, as being the quality of living in the coastal zone, for
Yeah,
instance, or
participants mention recreation,
that's where
biodiversity.
recreation comes in, of course. Biodiversity is important for having a sustainable ecosystem and also a stable ecosystem. I see that sustainability comes in. That's an interesting one, actually, because
Why?
at this moment, the vessels that we use for building these sand motors and for carrying out the annual shoreline nourishments are relatively traditional in the sense that they mostly still use the classic gas oils, and there's innovation needed in order to improve that, and also to come up with new solutions that probably make use of solar power, for instance, and that comes with new dredging concepts. So there's definitely room for improvement there, I would say.
Okay, let's see from your current insiders research community perspective, what are the implications for science and research in general?
Thank you very
Stefan
much, Rick.
Aarninkhof.
Okay, there's my first slide again. Thank you, Rick, for the introduction. Indeed, I've seen the sand motor from different sides of the world, and today I will focus on I will reflect on the sand motor from a scientific perspective, and I will do so by addressing three different issues. The first one is what are the ingredients that are needed for scientific success? The second one is how has the sand motor worked as inspiration for new projects in the Netherlands and beyond? And the third one is what could this mean for future? And let me start with a rhetoric question. The sand motor, was it a scientific success? Well, for this audience and in my role, the answer is obvious, of course. The answer is yes. I landed a picture from Alexander van Aarninkhof and his group. They have a workshop this afternoon on called the sand motor innovation, science, and export. And they prepared the list, a figure of the number of publications that are related to the sand motor starting in 2012, 1 year after implementation and until now. And you see a line that gradually goes up and that keeps on rising. So that's a good indicator for success. I do not want to listen to list all the individual scientific successes today. There's a very nice book on it, written by or edited by Arjen Luijendijk and Alexander van Ouwenhoven back from 2019, that gives an excellent overview of all the work that was carried out as part of the famous Nature Coast and NEMO projects, both centered around the sand motor with many PhDs and postdocs. Those projects have resulted in a number of fundamental scientific breakthroughs on understanding nearshore coastal processes, but also there was a very strong focus on this interdisciplinary research process. So collaboration between scientists from different fields. It was a unique project in that sense, and there's more about that in this afternoon's workshop organized by Alexander and Mathieu and Bart-Jan van der Spek. They're all in the audience over here. But what are the ingredients for this success? And that's important. And I think there are some generic elements in there that we can learn from the Sand engine. Well, this is the obvious one, of course. You need great leadership and you need great research teams. leadership is here pictured by Marcel Stive, my predecessor. I think he, well, we all know that he has been, he's often referred to as one of the grandfathers of the sand engine, amongst many other people. But since this presentation is focused on science, I focus a bit on the scientific involvement. And he was involved in the very early decision making and concept development for the sand engine, which was actually way before 2011. It started already, I think, somewhere in the early 2000s. And if you include all Ronald Waterman's efforts on promoting the concept of building with nature, you can go decades back in time. All those efforts are needed to finally celebrate the implementation of such a big project in 2011. And after that, you need these great teams to harvest these scientific opportunities that are being enabled by a big project like the sand engine. So this is a trivial one. But now, what else do you need? And this also all goes back to the period before 2011. The first thing that you need is a strategic vision. And Annemieke talked already about that, how that came into, how that was developed in those years and how the interaction between the different people occurred. I think the Kustboekje, published in, what was it, 2006 by the Committee Frans van Tielro, was instrumental. That was the first time that the concept sand engine was written down. The solution was not there yet, but the concept was being described, so the strategic vision was there. And another very important moment, I think, was the so-called ambition agreement sand motor, established in 2008. And one of the goals defined in that agreement was to encourage innovation and knowledge development. Now, from a scientific perspective, that was a crucial element, because after that, the design phase started. And this was how designs are done in a typical way, with an environmental impact assessment and so on. And from a scientific perspective, it was important to get a design with a large signal to noise ratio. What do I mean by that? If you have a very gradual intervention, it can become difficult to accurately measure the signals of the natural processes. Whereas if you have a more condensed intervention in a natural system, the changes become very clear. And at the lower part of the figure, you see the 4 different designs that were on the table, and each served a slightly different purpose. But coastal safety was a very important one. The one on the left-hand side was promoted by Rijkswaterstaat because it was the most efficient nourishment you could think of, namely in a longshore submerged nourishment. From a scientific perspective, the more condensed alternatives, the one on the right-hand side of the picture, were much more appreciated. So since this objective was there to promote science and innovation, that became an argument in these discussions in picking out the best design, so to say. And then be aware, there's always also a link between the design that you pick and how it's being funded. If it were 100% Rijkswaterstaat funding, it would have become the left-hand side of the picture, most likely, because that is what's in their prime objectives. And because of this involvement of the province, the other 2 or 3 alternatives remained on the table as well, which was at the end of the day crucial to arrive at the best solution from a scientific perspective again. Then this is the third one. Make sure you have a monitoring program in place. That sounds a bit more trivial than it is. Quite often monitoring programs start too late or do not cover the full scope of processes that you want to measure. Start on time and make sure it's up and running, preferably before the start of the works. And also make sure that there is a sufficient detail in your monitoring efforts, in a sense that it's not good enough from a scientific perspective again. It's not good enough to only measure the effects. You want to understand the underlying processes. And by doing that over a broad range of different measurements, both, let's say, physically as well as ecologically, you can enable multidisciplinary research like was carried out at the sand engine. And actually, we are still actively working to continue this in the future together with Rijkswaterstaat, of course. We are aware that we do have a unique living lab in our backyard named the Sand Engine. We try to combine different sources of measurements at the Sand Engine, both in situ field measurements, numerical model simulations, and remote sensing data, and we fuse them into one data set, into one data corpus, so that we can follow the behavior of the sand motor in real time. This is a bit ambitious. We do this with international partners. The idea is if you focus on one site in the Netherlands and make sure that you have all data available at this one site, that allows for multidisciplinary research, and you can create a diversity by linking to other sites across the world in order to get a more diverse spectrum of measurements. We call it ICON, International Coastline Observatories Network. But once you have such an icon, the sky is the limit if it comes to research. For instance, and I will speed up a little bit, Rick, with my slides. The sky becomes the limit because if we have this big living lab, this field lab, the sand motor, we can, for instance, start carrying out manipulative experiments. And there's an example here, and you saw that already for those of you who attended the conference opening on Tuesday. Tim van der Hagen also showed a picture of this experiment. This was a junior ocean container that was developed by my colleagues Siert de Vries and Jasper Schijmans for his MSc research to test the process of junior ocean in a real world condition at the waterline. So they brought the dune to the waterline, so to say. And this will be repeated by Paul van Wiegen, one of our PhD students, on a larger scale later this fall. He's going to build a real dune on the beach to measure what happens during junior ocean processes during big storm events. Can only be done because we do have the sand motor, we do have the living lab, and we do have the research infrastructure in place to measure the conditions in the field. Also for students, so this is about capacity building. Having this field lab around the corner allows for embedding in education. This is a role that is, well, important for us as university, because this is the way how we want to educate future scientists and future engineers. But it's also appreciated by the outside world. We are actively being supported by the Dutch hydraulic contractors and also by the foundation Zabavas to offer this type of education to students. It's quite labor intensive. Mathieu de Schipper plays a leading role in this. It's a relatively small group that need a lot of attention, but it's crucial for the type of engineers and scientists that we want to educate at TUDelft. And last but not least, having such a big field site is a boost for international cooperation. Again, having the measurement infrastructure in place allows you to invite people from all over the world to come over to the Netherlands, carry out joint experiments, learn from each other data, and work together and build out new relationships. Sand motor was instrumental for that. So a success so far, I would say, from a scientific perspective. But what about the upscaling? This is a picture from Peru, from Lima. It's not the real world, it's an artist impression. And this is one of the lessons we learned from the Nature Coast project. Upscaling the sand motor to new applications is not a matter of copy-paste. It was already mentioned earlier this morning, because every system, every society, every governmental system is different. So you need dedicated solutions for the location where you are. Having said that, the sand motor outcomes did inspire a series of projects that were carried out in the Netherlands in very different environments, in very different settings. And actually, this is an inspiration for us to make sure that we understand how it works, not only on the open coast, but also in the other settings that are being typified by these projects. And I'll mention only very briefly. This is the first one. The Hondsbosse Duinen. This is the one that comes closest to the sand engine. It's a mega nourishment meant to protect the coast of North Holland. There used to be a sea defense, a sea wall, but it's now covered in sand. Major questions were on the uncertainties. There was a contract where the contractor was responsible for 20 years of maintenance. So where does the sand go? That's where we learned directly from the sand engine, used the models that were developed for the sand engine in order to make the assessments over here. And also dune development is a big issue here at this project. It has resulted in a terrific area. If you go there nowadays, you will not recognize the old situation anymore. Houtdripdijk is in a lake environment, fairly different. Rins Wilmink is here. He has been encouraging this project to a large extent. Sandy foreshore used as defense in order to avoid strengthening of the dike. Also successful. The sand works there. And the principles were taken over from the sand engine in how to defend a coastline like this. The Prins Hendrik Zanddijk, a very multidisciplinary project on the coast of Texel, which was actually financed both by, I think, Rijkswaterstaat in combination with the Water Fund. So there was a dual objective for this project. Key questions here is how can coastal safety be combined with creating opportunities for nature? It was, and we also have a research program running over here with Marlies van der Lucht. She talked about that at this conference as well. And last but not least, a field lab where we learn from if it comes to the role of natural foreshores for dike protection, and that's carried out at the Hedwigepolder, which is presently ongoing. Now, very briefly on the future. We know that the sea level is rising. We know that there is an acceleration of the sea level of the rate of sea level rise is coming up. We also have learned from the Kustgenezen 2.0 project what's roughly the amount of sediment that we need in order to keep up with sea level rise for different sea level rise scenarios. There's a scale increase expected in the amount of sand that we need to nourish every year. So is the simple question, how can we get those extra cubic meters of sand in the coastal profile? Well, that sounds like an easy question, but in reality, it's probably less trivial. There are a lot of questions that come up then. How can I do that in an efficient way? Where does the sand go? What will be the ecological impact if I continuously nourish the coastline in one or the other way? Not in the last place, how does society respond to these large-scale nourishments? So to wrap up, there's insight needed, and Van Dongeren mentioned this early this week. There's insight needed in the effectivity, the feasibility, and the acceptability of sandy strategies for climate adaptation. And building on the lessons that we learned from the sand motor, I would be in favor of doing that in a proactive way on the basis of a tangible field experiment and following a learn by doing strategy where collaboration between different parties is key. And that could be done, but this is just one suggestion in the context of a living lab for climate adaptation, which essentially means that you create room on the coastline to experiment with new concepts. I'd like to stipulate that it's important, and this resonates what Annemieke just said, it's important to start thinking about this now, because if you want to have this in place by 2050, in order to be able to strengthen the coastline by 2015 for the full 450 kilometers of Dutch coastline, it's important to start testing now, because you need to develop the knowledge now by means of real-world projects, which evolve over a timescale of, let's say, 20 years, in order to generate the lessons that we need to have by 2050 to bring this into practice on a large scale. These are the lessons learned from the sand motor for science and innovation. So yes, for sure, the sand motor has been instrumental for this. It has offered a unique facility for research and education. It's been an enabler for the implementation of new solutions in other environments, not only on the sandy coast. And I guess it can act as a stepping stone for a future climate adaptation lab to develop the answers for the challenges of the near future. Thank you.
Effectivity, feasibility, acceptability. Annemieke Nijhof also appealed to us to step up and take bold moves.
Yeah.
Where are they?
I think they are in the scale of the nourishments, and in the challenges that you will face once you start thinking about implementing these large-scale approaches. For instance, well, you can tell the sand motor is a nice example again where we learn. Initially, there was some controversy. It was a bit controversial, the sand motor, right? Not everyone was enthusiastic
Among inhabitants
among the
of
inhabitants
area?
of the area, and they said, "Well, we have a nice coastline. Why do we need this? Why do we need this sand motor?" Public perception changed over the years, and those are the things that I think you can only learn if you implement large-scale solutions in practice. This is not something that you learn from a PC or behind a desk. You need to do it. You need to make your hands dirty. And well, another scientific challenge, of course, or sandy if you like. and a scientific challenge is, I think, is how to link that appreciation. So the way how people value their coastline, for instance, how to link that into an engineering to an engineering design. which is what we hydraulic engineers are good in traditionally. And that's not so trivial to do that.
And in the research community itself, where did you enter into discussions like Annemieke Nijhof had with Bert? Did you have any discussions with researchers? Someone said, but Stefan, or you said, but.
Well, I think there was debate, of course, about what is the expected degree of dune development that you can expect. Just before the sand motor was implemented, there was a project around the corner where also a natural dune area was created, and they were struggling with the water level in the beginning, the groundwater level. So what looked like a relatively straightforward project turned out to be complex in reality. The same happens over here. I mean, you can put 20 million cubic meter of sand on the coast, but what does it mean for the expected dune development? And I think in the original document, the ambition was to create 70 hectares of new dunes, but there was a large uncertainty in that number, and still
So it could stretch from.
There's a broad range, and still we are. I mean, we make great progress, right? We study all these sites nowadays at different universities, but that's one of the major step forwards I think the sand motor had delivered, and the same for the long-term morphological calculations. The initial predictions actually predicted that the sand motor would disappear after 20 years. It was designed for 20 years, and that was with the best models available in those days. Well, nowadays we know better. We know that it takes a little bit longer, but also our models got a lot better in predicting those processes. So that's
fortunately, because Rijkswaterstaat is already eager to find new experiments on this specific spot.
And that's where these models come into play.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And what do you ask participants in this session to do after we go home? What can we do to help research even further?
Be creative, come up with new solutions that address multiple objectives. So not only let's say the efficient placement of sand to guarantee coastal safety. That's of course a starting point. That's always there. But let's try to think new methods that address a broader range of issues. Maybe methods that help to reduce emissions during dredging, to reduce environmental impacts, ecological impacts. We would be very interested to bring those further and to explore those further.
So they can email you if anyone has a new project coming up, and
for sure,
learning from your lessons. Thank you very much, Professor Stefan
Aarninkhof.
Get your hands sandy, indeed. That's what they did in the UK, more specifically in the North Norfolk District Council. Its coastal manager, Rob Goodliff, can tell more about the results of their sandscaping scheme in Bacton. Video.
Hello, my name's Rob Goodliff. I'm Coastal Manager for Coastal Partnership East. This is a shared management team for 3 local government authorities in Norfolk and Suffolk, England. I'm here today to talk to you about the first sandscaping scheme outside of the Netherlands. It's often referred to as the little nephew or niece of the Dutch sand motor. I'm going to introduce you to the challenges we faced, the opportunity, the scheme itself, and performance to date, and then we'll take questions at the end. Norfolk and Suffolk are on the east coast of England, and this is shown on the right-hand side of the screen. The Norfolk coast, if it isn't low-lying and floodable, it's got very soft cliffs and it erodes. And if you're very, very unfortunate, like the community at Walcott, you're at erosion risk and also at flood risk. So at Bacton and Walcott, we have a gas terminal made up of various different terminals from different companies. This supplies up to 1/3 of the UK gas supply. Now there's infrastructure on top of the cliffs, rising pipes through the cliffs, and there's pipelines underneath the beach. These pipelines need a certain amount of beach coverage for safety reasons. The policy for the coast at the terminal is to hold the line of defences. This is to protect this nationally important gas infrastructure. However, this can only be done if it doesn't have detrimental effects to the adjacent villages of Bacton and Walcott and those further downdrift. The villages of Bacton and Walcott are fairly traditional villages with small communities of homes, businesses, with some holiday industries. The defences here were built in the 1950s and are now very much reaching the end of their lives. A key challenge is lowering beaches, which we'll see in the next few slides. And with future sea level rise, there are many challenges ahead, and the communities will need to adapt. However, the government policies are only just enabling those sorts of adaptations to start to be considered. Therefore, in order to buy time, the Sandscaping Scheme has extended the lives of the villages. It's not considered economically viable to protect those communities for the longer term. These photos are from the village of Walcott before the scheme was constructed. As you can see, the beach levels here are very, very low. When the seawall was built in the 1950s, the beaches would have been above the concrete walkway that you can see. The foundations are now very, very exposed and are at risk of undermining. Also, the access to the beach for the public who live in the village or also visitors is almost impossible at this time. We as a local authority also can't access the beach with machinery to maintain the timber groins and the defences themselves. Because of the low beach levels, the water depth is much deeper at the seawall. Therefore, the sea is at the seawall for many hours of the day. This increases day-to-day wear and tear. Also, due to the depth of water, the waves are much larger hitting the sea wall, increasing the risk of overtopping and damage. The top left photo shows a highway which is becoming more and more regularly inundated by the sea. This puts adjacent properties, businesses, and also homes at risk of flooding. In 2013, we had a significant storm surge and very large numbers of properties were flooded due to the overtopping. It also impacted on many homes along the coastal frontage due to direct wave impact. This heightened the concerns of the local community. The terminal itself is located on soft erodible cliffs. In front of the cliffs are timber revetments, as you can see here on the top left. These are now very much at the end of their design life. Due to the low beach levels, during storm events, these are beginning to fail. And as such, in the 2013 storm surge, the terminal itself lost between 5 to 10 meters of cliff. Coupled with the lowering of the beach, which reduces the safety margins over the high-pressure gas pipelines, this met a trigger for the terminal now needing to provide some level of protection to its assets. These challenges led to an opportunity. The gas terminal needed to protect its assets, but without having a detrimental effect on the adjacent communities. The communities didn't have a way forward. A scheme was not economically viable on its own, and as of yet, there wasn't any coastal adaptation planned or developed to help them adapt to a changing coastline. This led to lots of discussions at all levels. In the bottom right, this is at the heart of English government at Downing Street, discussions going on between gas terminal operators, ourselves, ministers, local members of parliament, and our consultants, right down to the local community standing on the beach, looking at the coast and trying to understand how it works and why a scheme here made of sand may actually be the right sort of answer. So through working together, we managed to devise a scheme over a period of time which met the terminal operators' needs for protection, whilst also benefiting the local communities and actually extending the life of the defences for this section of coast using natural processes. So, why did we end up with the Sandscaping Scheme? Well, working with Bacton Gas Terminal, we engaged with Royal Haskoning DHV to help us design a way forward. We found that sandscaping could work on our coastline, and in fact, the terminal needed a sandy solution. Rock armour and traditional defences weren't going to work due to sensitivities around the gas pipelines and also the downdrift consequences. We also found that by working on a sandy solution, we could have a combined scheme which could benefit the terminal and the villages together, something which we didn't think was possible using more traditional defences. In order to develop the scheme, we went through an iterative design process. The start point was the Dutch sand motor. Royal Koning DHV used modelling to help refine the size and the shape of the scheme. Early contractor involvement enabled us to check that the scheme could be constructed. It also enabled us to refine the costs and also check that the sediment was available from local extraction sites. Finally, an environmental impact assessment was completed. This helped us mitigate against negative consequences and maximise on environmental opportunities. Ultimately, this led to the final design of 1.8 million cubic metres of sediment. 1 million cubic metres were placed in front of the terminal to give a very high level of protection for about 15 to 20 years. The further 800,000 cubic metres were spread across the village's frontages, turning back the clock and providing higher beaches and higher levels of protection. Over time, the sand will move and the sediment in front of the terminal will work its way across in front of the villages, providing protection for the future. To give a bit of context of how much 1.8 million cubic metres of sediment is, if you think of Wembley Stadium, where they're playing football at the moment, if you filled that up to the roof 1.5 times, that is about the approximate volume. The project was estimated to cost about £20 million. The economic benefits total 32 million, and this excludes all the benefits of the gas terminal itself. About 300 homes would be better protected from erosion, 100 homes better protected from flooding. The gas infrastructure would be protected, highways would be protected, and there were various community and economic benefits, including time to adapt to future climate change. There's also research opportunities, as it's a very innovative technique and could build upon the learning from the Dutch sand motor. There still remained the challenge of how the scheme was to be funded. In the UK, not all coast protection schemes are 100% government funded. Infrastructure, such as the gas terminal itself, are required to fund their own coast protection measures. In the end, 2/3 of the scheme was funded from private sources from the terminal operators. 1/3 of the funding needed to be found from public sources. A funding package was put together which would not have been possible for another scheme in this location. I'm now going to take you back in time to Walcott in the 1960s. Here we are standing on the almost new seawall. Notice how high the beach is, right up to the seawall, with lots of dry beach for you to put your deck chair and sit behind your windbreak. Keep an eye on that property on the top right-hand corner circled in red. You're going to see it again in a moment. Now fast forward to 2013. Here we are in the same spot. We can see the beach levels are very, very low, and we've just had a North Sea storm surge. The seawall itself has remained intact, but has suffered for quite a bit of damage. The community behind has suffered from severe flooding, and these properties along the front here have had significant wave impact and large amounts of damage. This is all added to the community's fears about the coast. And here we are, fast forward to 2019, following the construction of the scheme. Here it's high water, and there's still a very large dry beach which can absorb the energy of the sea, and also somewhere to put your deck chair. Well, here we are back in April 2021. So as we can see, the sand itself has reshaped as would be expected, and we've now got a subtidal bar formed just offshore, and you can see the waves breaking a little way off the shore. This is all taking the energy out of the sea before it gets to the beach and the seawall. We have got windblown sand, which is historically something that we did have on this coastal frontage. We've got slightly more than perhaps we anticipated prior to this scheme, and this is something that we're now looking to manage moving forwards. So, how's the scheme performed to date? Well, it's actually performed almost similar to how it was modelled in the first place. In November 2020, the overall loss from the frontage was roughly as expected, and there was actually an increase in volume at the villages, although this isn't on the upper beach, it's on the lower levels on the seabed all still providing really positive protection to the villages. We've now just had the first survey for 2021 and we were awaiting results, but visual inspection of the beach is also looking positive. In reality, only time will tell. We don't know what storms we're going to face over the next few months or few years, but ultimately we will keep monitoring this frontage and expect it to continue to perform. So where does this lead us to the future for the resilience and transitioning of the community and the gas terminal? Sea level rise is expected to be 1.15 metres by 2100, but we've now got a government policy and strategy that is supportive of preparing for climate change. We are moving towards a low carbon future. So what future is there for the gas terminal? Maybe it will turn to producing hydrogen or carbon capture. And if so, there may be a need for a future sandscaping scheme in this location. Also, what's the future for sandscaping? In the UK, there's actively looking for other sites where this may be a viable option. But what about low carbon construction techniques? Is this something that needs to be looked at? And for the villages, there needs to be more community engagement and looking at adaptation pathways, seeking to plan and prepare for practical and viable solutions. What we've managed to do on this frontage is to turn back time and turn back the clock for these communities. But we now need to use that time to think about longer term planning. So to finish, as you weren't able to join us back in the summer of 2019 to see the scheme constructed, I think I'll transport you now back via a short film to the construction of the Bacton to Walcott Sandscaping Scheme.
The Norfolk Sandscaping Scheme was delivered by North Norfolk District Council's Coastal Partnership East team on behalf of the project partners and is the first of its kind in the UK and outside of the Netherlands. Bacton Gas Terminal supplies up to 1/3 of the UK's gas demand and lies alongside the villages of Bacton and Walcott on the North Norfolk coast. The North Norfolk cliffs have long suffered from coastal erosion, with flooding at Walcott during storm events. The scheme was designed to provide protection for the terminal and the nearby villages. Designed by Royal Haskoning DHV, the project took learning from the Dutch sand motor and using detailed modelling developed a design to provide the protection required. During the spring and summer of 2019, Team Van Oord delivered the scheme working 24 hours a day. Sand was collected by Van Oord's Ham 318 offshore from Great Yarmouth, and in just 6 weeks, 1.8 million cubic metres of sand was transported to Bacton and pumped through a 1 kilometre pipe to shore. At times, over 200 metres of new beach were created in one day. The sediment placed will move over time, feeding adjacent beaches and those further afield. The raised and lengthened beaches absorb the wave energy, which protects the cliffs, sea defences, assets and villages. Since its completion, monitoring, funded by partners, the Environment Agency and the Dutch Government Partners for Water scheme, will assess the performance of the project, providing valuable information for future sandscaping within the UK and worldwide. The successful delivery of this world first outside the Netherlands has better protected a nationally important gas terminal, 300 homes from erosion and a further 100 homes from flooding, while enhancing the natural beaches for recreation and the environment.
Truly an international cooperation. We see, among others, the Shell and the Royal Haskoning and the Van Oord logos on screen. The logos prepared from the UK. We can get in touch with the coastal manager himself, Rob Goodliff.
Hello.
Yeah, and questions coming in for you, Rob, about the reactions of different stakeholders. For instance, Shell was concerned about the risk of erosion for their gas terminal, wasn't it?
That's right. So they were looking for a scheme which was going to be practical to deliver, which would be consentable. But they're also concerned about their neighbours, the adjacent communities. So they wanted to do the right thing for those communities as well.
So how did they respond? Was it worth their money?
No, absolutely. So at the start of this, in 2013, I was standing on the seawall at the villages following the storm surge that we had, and was very much, thinking, what are we going to do here? What options do we have? We don't have a viable scheme. We don't have the government funding for something here. But it was then following that event actually was a catalyst for us to have those discussions, and Shell played a key role in that to find a sort of a collaborative approach which enabled us to deliver a joint scheme.
And what about the reactions from other stakeholders? You mentioned adjacent communities, for instance.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult initially for people to comprehend actually how's sand going to help. You don't build your house on sand because it washes away. So it was quite a hard concept to start with. We spent a lot of time talking to people, and in the end we had advocates within the community itself who understood that actually the beach was the best defence that they could have, and the concrete defences that they had needed that beach to actually make them work. There's always people.
So they ended up grasping the benefits of it for their own properties.
Yeah, absolutely. A good proportion of people did. There's always people who are going to say, "Oh, it won't work," But the reality is, it's slightly experimental. Only time will tell. But so far to date, we're pleased with performance.
Okay, we've heard from the sand motor project several organisms that were impacted by the project as well. We saw a fossil from an ox, the project leader brought it, but also talking about birds, for instance. What about the impact on local biodiversity?
Yeah, this is a really interesting sort of area. When we were constructing the scheme, we were obviously very concerned about that. So when the environmental impact assessment was completed, that was all considered. Unfortunately, when we came to construct and we were interested in protecting some of the cliff nesting birds, there was a lot of misunderstanding of that, and that took some time to overcome. But following that, we've completed a lot more research, particularly in monitoring around sand martins. And actually from that learning, we're now developing sort of guidance note for future, for other people wanting to deliver schemes sort of in these sorts of coastal locations. We probably have more data on sand martins now than probably anybody else.
Okay, so Rob, if I understand you correctly, you have more positive response from sand martins being a kind of swallow, right?
Yeah, so they're like a swallow, and they live in the soft cliffs here, and that we've found they're incredibly versatile animals. That they weren't worried about the construction whatsoever. To be honest, they were not worried about the activities of the sand being pumped on the beach and the machinery, and they adapted to that, and they're continuing to adapt now, sort of along the coastline. We've also looked at trying to sort of develop the dune habitats, particularly in front of the gas terminal itself. And we looked at options for planting marram grass. But Natural England, who are like the government advisors on sort of natural aspects in the UK, advised not to do the planting, actually. The interest will come to see what nature does and to see how that will colonise the area. And so that's something we're keeping an eye on at the moment.
Yeah, so that's a third stakeholder affected by the project. That's a living organism. And what about the dead ones? Did you find any fossils you cherish for your living room?
Yeah, really interesting. There's been a lot of finds, Paleolithic finds mainly of stone sort of axe heads, flint shards from early habitation, sort of the North Sea, when sea levels were much lower. These were very unexpected, and the British Museum have termed it as a significant area for finds, and we've since then helped fund Queen Mary University complete more research in that area, cataloguing many of these finds and working with the people who are going out every day, while they're walking the dogs, picking things up. So some really interesting information coming out about sort of the dredging sites, which will probably inform how they may be managed in the future.
Okay, and as far as the monitoring of the engineering works are concerned, from Portugal, there's a question from a participant coming in about your monitoring. For instance, based on which information do you expect to decide on renourishment in the next 1 or 2 decades? Last question.
Yeah. Okay. So the monitoring, we've got a very extensive monitoring program in the UK going back to 1992 on the coastline. But for this scheme, we've enhanced it, and we've actually fortunate enough we work with Royal Skoning again to capture Dutch government funding to enhance the monitoring at this stage. So we've been doing jet ski bathymetry, LiDAR work, and this is all feeding into our understanding of those the short term, the first few years, and then there's a development around a digital twin. So the idea with this is we'll be able to automate the data that we capture, feeding into the digital twin to be able to give us projections into the future on performance. Obviously, this is critical for the gas terminal itself, so they can think about when a trigger point may be met, so they might need to do a future intervention. And for ourselves, about actually with the villages, understanding when we may need to do further adaptation with them, although those discussions need to start sooner rather than later.
Okay, thank you very much. So for all stakeholders concerned, from Shell to local communities, adjacent communities, and the biodiversity perspectives, it was worth the effort. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Rob Goodliff. Yeah, and back to the Netherlands, back to where we all started. We started with the project leader working for Rijkswaterstaat, and we will also harvest the results of this session with her, Carola van Gelder. Yeah, and while she is joining us on stage, you can already enter into the Mentimeter question she had prepared for you. Let's imagine in a few minutes you'll have lunch. Probably you are up to it. In that case, the first one you will speak to, whether it's a relative, a spouse, a friend, someone you happen to know before, what is the word you will utter about this morning session? So which word will stick with you? What is the word that describes or carries away your thoughts? What is the word that definitely will stick for you? It's coming up on screen for the project leader herself, and you can harvest. Carola.
Wow. Lots of things coming up. And well, I wrote a few things down as a result from this beautiful morning, actually. And
yeah,
one
inspiring,
of the inspiring, absolutely,
collaboration.
it was very inspiring, collaboration. And one of the words I see in the screen and that I've written down myself is be bold. That was Annemieke Nijhof told us everything about that, and that's one thing I keep in my mind. Make decisions, do it, and that's also the thing I was proud of. We actually did it, the Sand Motor. But then on the other hand, it's not the end. This looks like an end conference after 10 years, but maybe it's just the beginning. So that is one thing I harvest from this morning, and it's already also in the screen.
So now what?
So now what? Yeah, maybe another Sand Motor. That was spread the word, but maybe we also have new Sand Motors. Looking at the screen that Stefan told us, with all the other projects. But I think the main thing is that we collect all the results and try to implement them and keep on working together. Implement especially for the future, because there might be more risk, more need for sand, more multifunctional approaches, not only for the coast as a defense line, but also for nature, ecology, society, everything.
All the benefits we discussed this morning.
All the benefits, and collaboration is one of the biggest words written down on the screen. So I totally agree with that. So a multifunctional approach by collaboration. That's one of the biggest thing, and I will keep that in mind.
Yeah, so the three words that are boldest are inspiring. Okay, so that's an evaluation.
Yes.
Collaboration, that's an appeal to the future. And of course, bold. That's the attitude we need. Thank you very much, participants, also for your input. And in 20 2031. Will we have another conference called 20 Years of Sandmotor?
If you ask me, I hope so. We will continue monitoring and we will continue collaborate with all the parties within what we call the Golden Triangle, with governments, but also with science, knowledge institute, NGOs, so
And business.
and business, of
Yeah.
course. If you ask me, yes, there will be another one, and we will collect the results. And because if you ask me, the sand motor is and will be a living lab, and we have to use it while it's there.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
According to Rijkswaterstaat, also on behalf of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management, the province of South Holland, the TUDelft, and of course, all its partners.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Carola van Gelder.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to all of you as well for adding to the Sand Motor project with all your ideas and questions and adding more sand to the coast and to the massive amount of knowledge we have gathered over the last decade. Thank you very much for joining us, and also thank you for adding these perspectives into our conversations, technical co-host Petra Damsma. And if you want, you can join her in her workshop on attractive areas from a socio-economic perspective, because she turns back to her previous role as a technical manager of the Sand Motor project. Thank you very much. Enjoy all of the workshops. You'll have registered for one of them for the first round and one of them for the second round. They'll be on screen by now, and see you hopefully before 2031. Thank you very much. 10 years of Sand Motor. Enjoy your lunch.